Hello, everyone. All right, let's get that going. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there. I think this is the last session of the Summer Institute. So thanks for being here. I appreciate the fact that all of you are probably a little bit overloaded with information by this point. My name, as Andy said, is Chris Blaisdell. I am with the GED Testing Services. I am the product owner. I bet some of you recognize me since I've been doing a few presentations over the past months on our online proctored test, as well as other technology advancements that we've got going on. I was asked to specifically talk about the online proctored test today. What I'm going to focus on, though, I'm not going to go through the standard scheduling flow that we've done in the past. I am really going to focus on all of the technology components so that you can help your learners navigate the system test and the check-in process. So these are perhaps elements of the online proctored test experience that you yourself haven't experienced yet. I am partnered today by Mellissa, who I'm sure all of you know as she is your state relationship manager, and she will be answering any questions that you might have in the chat. We're going to go through the information fairly quickly, but please feel free to throw your questions in the chat and we'll pause between each section before moving on to address questions. All right, so this is what we're going to go through quickly here. We're going to talk a little bit about why testing online, and I'll give you some results from a student survey we did there. And then, as I said, the system test, tools for preparing your students for the online proctored test, and then we'll go through the details of the check-in process. All right, so we actually, as you know, we've been in pilot mode. We spun up the online proctored test at the very beginning of June last year because all of our testing centers had to close due to the pandemic and our students still needed to get their GEDs. So we got it up there, but we had to go into pilot mode because we didn't know how it was going to work. It was a brand new technology. And so we knew we needed a period of learning and advancement and improvements before we determined if it was going to be a test that we wanted to keep long-term, or a method of testing to keep long-term. As part of that, we did send out a survey to all students who took an online proctored test. And these are kind of the pros and cons that we learned from that survey. The 24/7 scheduling is something that the students really appreciate. In many areas, testing centers are only open 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, which doesn't always work for students who have full-time jobs. So the fact that the online proctored test is available every hour of the day or night, and they can often find an appointment within 30 minutes. So whenever they're ready to go, they can schedule an appointment. They don't necessarily have to schedule something that's a couple weeks or a month out from when they feel like they're ready to test. Obviously, with testing from home, there's no need for transportation, time off work, arranging for childcare. Many of our students said it was wonderful to be able to test at 10 o'clock at night after the kids were in bed. They could just get their test done and feel comfortable and not have to worry about any of those other logistical concerns. We also had a lot of students tell us that they have test anxiety, and so the option to test from home made them feel more comfortable and safe. They had a lot less testing anxiety when they were in their own environment. And then I wanted to point out that as of June 1st, Pearson VUE stopped accepting expired IDs. They have just come out at the beginning of this week with an announcement. They are now accepting expired IDs again for the online proctored test. They aren't in testing centers, but they are now for the online proctored test. And that is because so many locations are still shut down, and the DMVs are so backloaded that a lot of people can't get their renewed ID. So those are a lot of the benefits to why a student might choose the online proctored test to going into a testing center. There are some other sides of it, right? Every coin has two sides. So some of our students also said, yes, I'd go back and take my online proctored test for every subject but math. Not having a physical whiteboard to write out equations was really hard, and that on-screen whiteboard was more challenging. Other students said the same thing about the calculator, that the on-screen calculator works and is okay, but I really prefer to have a physical calculator in my hand for math. We obviously also know that not all students have the necessary computer equipment, internet speed for video streaming, and all of those system setups. And then we also know that on the online proctored test, we can't accept, because of the artificial intelligence software that is scanning those IDs, we can't accept restricted IDs. So a restricted ID is something like a military ID. So there is the chance that a student may only have a military ID and they may not have another secondary ID. And so they may not be able to test online for that reason. All right, so let's go a little bit into the student experience. When a student goes to their homepage, this is one of the cards that they will see. This will obviously be changing a little bit as of September 1st when we move out of our pilot mode, because it will no longer be considered a beta. I did put a little note down here. This link, Explore the Student Experience by creating an account on our demo site, is in GED Manager on the homepage. So you can always create a student account through that link, and it's not in production, so it's not going into our actual database. So at any point, if you want to experience that account setup or get that feeling for what it looks like within the student's account, you can always do that. If you don't have GED Manager access, you can create a student account in production. We just ask that perhaps you use your last name as candidate, so then we know it's a fictitious student and we won't count it in all of our GED analytics. All right, so I'm sorry, was there a question? Okay. So on the homepage, we've got the schedule or learn more. We would hope that a student would click the learn more button so that they can learn more about the online proctored test before they go ahead and schedule it. The learn more page has about online testing and this overview video, which is also on the public side. So you can always go out there and watch the video. It's a very good video. It just kind of gives everybody an overview of what the online proctored test is. This is where we talk about just at a high level what's needed to test. And we want to emphasize these 4 things. The government issued ID essentially is the same as testing in person, but these other 3 are unique to the online proctored test. Obviously, we talked about the equipment and system setup. The private workspace is important for people to realize. Just because you're testing from home doesn't mean that you can just be out on your deck and have, friends and family walking by. You are creating your own little testing center within your home that needs to be private, and you need to be alone. And then, of course, for the online proctored test, we require the GED Ready Green score before a student is eligible to schedule their OP test. We then go into a little bit of how it works at a high level again, kind of a step-by-step process for them. And number 1 is the system test. So we're going to go through that in more detail. Again, before test day is the next thing in this learn more page. It kind of scrolls on and on. And again, we have here, run the system test. We emphasize this multiple times. It is critical that they make sure they have all of the equipment needed in order to do the online proctored test. So now we're going to go through possible points of failure here. So let's say I click on that system test link from my student account. One of the things I want to point out here is upper right, this whole experience, the system test experience, is translated into multiple languages. So at any point, the student can go up here and choose the language they prefer from the dropdown, and then their whole system test experience will be in that language. The other thing I want to point out is that the system test should be done from the computer that the student is going to be testing from. So this is an important point. If they've created their account and they're in their student account on their cell phone, and they were just, oh yeah, let's see. No, don't run the system test from your cell phone. It's not going to work. But we want to make sure that they're doing it from the test or from the system they're going to be testing from. Otherwise, it's pretty easy. They copy this access code just by clicking the button, and then they click the download on view button. This is what they will see if they were doing this from their cell phone or from a computer that does not have an operating system supported by OnView. So it gives a little bit more information about the operating systems needed and tells them, try again. All right, but let's say I am on my computer. The first thing that's going to go through is the network checks. There are 4 different things that are checked in the network check: download speed, application connectivity, Athena Browser Edition, which is the test driver that delivers the GED test, and video streaming through the cloud. This only takes a few seconds to do all of these checks. All right, so if I have a failure, so I'm going to go through the failures because I think many of us who have potentially run the system test from our own computers, all of us, given the fact that we're on these Zoom calls and everything, we probably have all of the necessary system equipment, and we're getting greens all the way. So I think it's helpful for you to see what could be read and what to do about it. So if the student has a failure in the network checks, they're going to get this red X. They're going to see this red link to troubleshoot, and there's still going to be this rerun button. So we'll go through that in a minute. All right, so I click that red button and I find out that my internet speed was the problem. This is an example of what they might see. 0.45 Mbps is very, very slow. Odds are good that all of us probably have more like 3 Mbps. The minimum needed is 1. So this would be very, very slow. This could be because they're using a hotspot instead of an actual internet connection. That can cause some problems. In fact, we are telling people that a hotspot is prohibited. In general, hotspots don't have a consistently strong enough connection to maintain the video streaming needed for the online proctor test. So if they're not sure what their connection speed is, because most of us don't know, we do have a link here to this speedtest.net, which is a free site so that you can test your upload and download speed and make sure that it does meet the minimum requirements for the online proctor test. All right, let's do another example here. The internet speed maybe was green, but I clicked that red button and it tells me that the ping didn't work. So this is unlikely to be a problem for a student testing from home. This is more likely to be a problem for a student testing from a library or an education center, somewhere that has some sort of network or firewall or permissions. So if you do have students coming into your center to take tests, this is where you'd want to bring your network administrator in to make sure that these URLs are whitelisted so that the student can test from your center. All right, the last check is that video streaming. So in this case, internet speed was green, the ping results were green, but the video streaming was a problem. This is the most common issue for our students. And I'll be honest in that it can take up to 30 seconds sometimes to establish that cloud connection with the video streaming vendor. So in this case, it's telling me it's not working. There's a couple of things I can do. One is to make sure that everybody else in my household is not trying to stream at the same time. So if I've got somebody playing video games, and another person streaming Netflix, and maybe I have some sort of streaming software that's always running in the background, I need to turn all of those off so that I have max bandwidth for my online proctor test. That can help immensely in terms of establishing that cloud connection. The other thing I can do is that rerun button. So if your student gets green on everything but the red here for the video streaming, I'm going to say, close this window and go back to that main page and click that rerun button and go ahead and click it a few times, because after a few seconds, you probably will establish that video streaming connection. All right, after the network checks, the system test takes us through the equipment checks. This will be microphone, speakers, and webcam. The microphone, the student will be asked to count out loud so that it can be tested. If all is good, you'll see a green bar start to fill in here. If it's not good, we'll get another red X. The microphone failure can be due to either hardware or permissions. The nice thing about this troubleshooting messaging is that it really does go into details around what is the potential problem. So if it was a permission, it knows if you're on a Mac or a PC and will give you the appropriate troubleshooting steps to try and allow those permissions. So this is pretty good messaging in terms of how to fix the problem. Speakers, you'll hear a little Beethoven play. If you hear it, you can say, yes, I've got it. And then that's green. If you can't hear it, then you'll say, no, I'm not hearing it. And again, you'll get this troubleshooting message on how to allow for your speakers to work for the test. And you can always rerun. Webcam is similar to microphone in that it can be a hardware or a permissions issue. And again, it'll go through the details on what you can do to fix that problem. So sometimes it is the hardware where if you've got, especially if you have a secondary webcam, it could be that that secondary webcam is not plugged in. It could be it's not connected to your computer. There could be some problem there. For internal webcams, sometimes that can be more of a permissions issue, that it's the software is trying to turn on the webcam and verify that it's working. And for whatever reason, there's a block within your system preventing OnView from turning on the webcam. All right, after we've passed the equipment checks, then the next thing is to close all of the other applications running on the computer and run the OnView exam simulation. This again is the same thing that the student is going to have to do on test day when they're checking in for their test. So there is some examples here where it shows how to know what's running in the background and how to close it. There is now, I don't have it on this screen, but there is now a test button as well, where a student can click the test button and see if there is anything running in the background and then go out and close it. The system test will also tell you if it does find something running and what it is so that you can go into your start menu and close that. After everything's shut down, then I'm going to run my exam simulation. It is just one item in the test driver, just like the same test driver that the GED test is run in. So I'll go down and launch the simulation. I couldn't get a screenshot of that because it's blocked by the browser lock. But then once it's done, then I get this congratulations, you've completed your system, everything is great. Don't forget to prepare your workspace and get your ID for testing day. All right, so that's the system test. And what we want students to do before they even schedule their online proctored test. So the goal here is that the student is ready to test, or maybe they're just exploring and they want to look into both testing options. We want to make sure that they're informed and can make the best decision for themselves. Before we go on to preparing your students for their OP test, Melissa, are there any questions we need to answer?
Yeah, so Sherry asked Chris, your slide indicated that the GED ready green score needs to be within the past 60 days. I thought that requirement has been changed. Please clarify. Thanks.
Yes, so that one, we're actually running an experiment right now. So as of June 23rd, I think it was, we removed the 60-day green requirement from our back end and changed it to 180 days. We did this because we had heard kind of conflicting information. So we heard concerns from educators that the 60 days was an obstacle for students, and we should have it be more than 60 days in order for a student to go ahead and schedule their OP test. When we looked in our database and looked at all of the data, we saw that like 98% of students were successfully taking their OP test within that 60-day window of earning a green score. So what we decided to do was to remove it from the back end. So all of the messaging on the website still encourages that 60-day time period, but a student is no longer being prevented from scheduling and taking their OP test if they are on day 65 or 95, up to 180 days past their earning their green. What we're doing with that, we're going to be pulling the data now here at the end of this month, since it will have been a couple of months, and we're going to look at all of those students. So on which day after earning a green did they schedule their test? When did they take their test, and how did they do on that test, so that we have a little bit more data to understand what kind of policy decision needs to be made in the best interest of our students. So that's what's going on there. Any other questions?
Laura said I had one student try to register at 61 days and was unable. Laura, you could send me the GED ID number of that student, and then I can look into that for you. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and that change did go into effect, like I said, June, like late June sometime. So it depends on when that student tried to schedule.
Great, and that's it for questions right now.
Okay. All right. So preparing, like I said, on the before test day, this is still within the student's account on the Learn More page. We have the information about the system test, and then we talk about preparing the workspace. The key with preparing the workspace is making sure there aren't any extra monitors or TVs or devices within the workspace, and that there aren't any notebooks or paper and pens, that kind of thing. It has to be a clear space. We also talk about checking in. This is also a note about closing down all those applications. It is amazing how you think you've got everything closed down and there's always something running in the background. Every time I've taken an OP test, it's like Teams. I swear I closed Teams and it's still running back there. So that's just another reminder. And then again, a reminder about turning off other devices in the household that might be streaming the internet from the background. You want to make sure that those aren't going on so that you have full bandwidth for the test. The student will launch their test from their GED account, and they can check in as early as 30 minutes before the exam time. And really all they need for check-in is their government issued ID and their mobile phone. During the test, there is technical assistance available to the student through the live chat. They can reach out to a proctor. Then we also have all of these things. So this is the section where when you're helping your student prepare, we want to make sure that you're going through this with them. Going through if they haven't taken any GED tests yet, going through the CBT tutorial is also very helpful for them. The on-screen calculator, watching that calculator tutorial and getting that practice with using the on-screen calculator is very beneficial. Students have talked about how if they hadn't done that ahead of time, they would have felt much more stress, and it would have taken them more time to work through their math problems if they hadn't utilized that tutorial and practice ahead of time. There's also the on-screen scratch pad within the test, and we just kind of have a couple of screenshots here showing how to open the scratch pad. For the most part, we find that students may use the scratch pad for their extended response item. It's a good opportunity to kind of take notes and organize your thoughts before actually writing the essay. The on-screen whiteboard is another one that we highly encourage students to practice with. And I would encourage all of you to practice with it too. We have a tutorial here that explains how to use the whiteboard. It's very helpful. It looks different and it operates different from what you would expect. I think so many of us now are used to touch screens that you just automatically want to use your finger, and you can't. You have to use your mouse. And so this is where and there's a lot of things on this whiteboard that you don't need. So with this, we're trying to show them really all you need is the pen feature, the eraser, and the undo redo button. There are other features that can be utilized that some students have said they like. This I don't know, cross-looking thing helps you pan. So if you've filled up all of this white space and you need more white space, you can use that to scroll over and get a whole new section of white space. And then you can always close it out. Just closing it will not erase it. It will still have everything on it once you open it up again. It's only the clear buttons that will erase it. So using that link and practicing with the whiteboard is key. All right, this is a reminder of the exam rules. The one that I want to point out here, we've already talked about a lot of these, but this no talking or reading out loud to yourself, this one is particularly hard for our students. Many of our students naturally just read out loud when they're reading on a screen, and that is something that the proctor will talk to them about. It's not allowed, and they will be told you can't read out loud. So that's one to make sure that you remind your students about prior to their testing. All right. test day check-in. Before we go through check-in, any other questions?
Yes, Chris. And for some reason, I'm not able to type responses here, so I'm not sure what's going on. But Jessica asked, if I use a specific computer, do I need to run diagnostics every time?
I would say if you are continually using the same computer, you probably don't. On the other hand, I would. And the reason I would is because while the computer itself isn't likely to change, we're always getting updates on our computers to the operating system, to various security software, so a lot can change on the system itself that may not have been a problem last week that could become a problem this week. There's also our internet connections change. I mean, I don't have any differences in my modem from today compared to last week. And yet every once in a while, I'll have issues with my internet. So running the system test on the day of your test, even if you've done it prior to scheduling, always is a good idea. Just run it again. It really, if you don't encounter any issues, it really takes only a minute or two. So it's worth doing another system test.
Okay, thank you. And Laura, thank you for the update about your student retaking the GED ready and passing. Andy asks, do you have to use a mouse if you have a touchscreen computer?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think you can use if you have a touchscreen computer, like a Chromebook doesn't work. But if you have like one of the HP touchscreen computers, I think your touchscreen will work. I can take that back and double check for you.
Okay. And then Kiana, any way to request that rule be removed? I'm not.
The 60-day rule or the talking out loud rule?
I'm not sure. Kiana, can you let us know which rule you were talking about?
The read aloud rule. Thanks.
We have, and we have gotten them to train the proctors to be a little bit more lax on that. It's obviously it's a security issue, right? So if I'm sitting here and I'm reading out loud, who's to say there isn't somebody, or I have a device somewhere that's recording me reading out loud every question and stealing the questions so that I can sell them. Or who's to say I don't have, a little earpiece in my ear and I'm reading them out loud and somebody's feeding me the answers. So it has to do with a cheating thing and a security of the test thing, which is why they don't allow the reading out loud. But we have been able to kind of train the proctors to relax a little bit so that if I'm looking at my screen and I'm just kind of mumbling quietly under my breath, and you can't really clearly hear what I'm saying, that will probably be okay, and the student won't be chastised for that. I will also say that a student will always get a warning first. So the proctor will usually use the chat to say, I have to remind you that you're not allowed to read out loud or make noise during your test. They'll do that first. If the student continues to read out loud, then the proctor will come through the audio and say, hey, I'm sorry, I have to warn you again. If you don't stop reading out loud, I'm going to have to revoke your test. And so the student will get a couple of warnings before the proctor finally has to say, you are continuously breaking the rules. I have to end your test now.
Great, thank you. And Andy asks, if a student has someone interrupt unexpectedly, what happens?
Kind of depends on the situation. So in many respects, if like a child walks through the room and the test taker is like, Jimmy, leave, you're not allowed to be in here. Usually the proctor will just say, just a reminder, you can't have anybody in the room. The test taker says, I know, he's going to stay out now. The test taker can usually continue. If, however, their friend comes in and they start having a conversation with the person who came in their room, the proctor is going to come on and say, you can't have anybody in the room with you. And if the test taker continues their conversation or says, oh yeah, hang on, then the proctor is going to say, no, I have to revoke your test. So, it's kind of depends on the situation. They don't necessarily automatically revoke the test just because somebody walked into the room.
Okay, thank you. And Teresa asks, could they use a whisper phone?
A whisper phone?
Yes,
I don't know what a whisper phone is.
I don't know either.
Maybe you can give us a little bit more information.
A whisper phone is a plastic tube that is bent kind of like the old hand or old phone receiver part that you'd hold up to your ear and your mouth. Right.
Okay.
So as you speak into the tube at your mouth side, you can hear it in your ear side.
I would guess no, that would be considered a secondary device that would not be allowed. And I haven't heard of that type of device being used as an accommodation. But
It would be like a little elbow CVC pipe that would put the sound right to their ear so that nobody else could hear it. Because a lot of people need to read out loud.
yeah, I don't think that would be allowed. I can double check and see, but I would guess that that's going to be considered like headphones, you know what I mean? Like any kind of hearing device other than obviously hearing aids is generally considered a no. There are options for people to request an accommodation. We have had people who have requested an accommodation to be able to have headphones in, to either noise canceling headphones or headphones in to block out outside noise, because of sensory issues, and just have music piped in while they take their test. So it's possible that that could be a testing accommodation. But I would guess that for a standard test taker, that would not be allowed.
Okay. And Anne says, I had a student who just passed the math test and took all 4 tests at home. He was using one of our laptops, which has a fairly large screen. He said he moved his eyes to look at the corners of the screen for various things located there. And the proctor threatened to fail him because his eyes were moving around. It only happened on the math test. Is this an unusual situation with that particular student and proctor, or a problem? He said it was because of where the items were located on the screen that he needed to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with math too, I mean, in the corners, we have like the formula sheet and the calculator reference sheet, and, some of those additional tools that students need to access. I would say, I wouldn't say that I hear about this enough to say it's a problem. But I do think it does come up. The proctors are trained to make sure, like, just as I'm talking here, right, I'm thinking and I'm looking out the window, or I'm looking over here. The proctors are trained, because if I'm just looking over here, you don't know what I'm looking at, right? So there could be someone or something there that you can't tell just by looking on my webcam. So the proctors are trained to watch for that and make sure that that's not a problem, that the person isn't cheating, that there isn't a security violation going on. In this case, it's a tough one.
I'm going to jump in there because he definitely thought it had to do with the math test and where the things were located on the screen. And I can't remember. I just spoke with him yesterday, so this just came up because I'm trying to check with learners that have tested online, and that was his last test. He definitely thought it was that it was a proctor issue. He said it never come up, but it was the eyes moving back and forth on the screen. He wasn't turning his head. He wasn't looking around. So he, maybe that's just something to be aware of. Another good reason why maybe the math test isn't the best one to start with online for a student, but this was his 4th test. So he was the only time it came up. I'll go back on mute.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. I have actually heard of that happening with the RLA as well, because if you remember with our RLA, there's usually a split screen, and especially when you're trying to read comparison documents or look at questions or whatever, you're going from one side of the screen to the other. So I've actually heard of that coming up in those cases too. So I think it does depend on just the size of the screen and how much the student their eyes are going back and forth, how much they're moving their head. It'll depend on the proctor too. You know, some proctors may just go, oh, that's just the test. Other proctors might be like, oh, I'm concerned about that. You know, I need to say something. In general, though, the proctor will always warn first before ending the test. So it's not common for a student's test to be revoked because their eyes were moving while they were taking their test.
Thank you, Chris. And so I see we're at 3:36 here. Wondering if you can answer these two questions and then just and then move on with the slides. Do they
Okay.
have to pay for another test when it's revoked? And is there any appeal process if the test is invalidated?
Definitely. If the test was revoked and the student feels that it was unfairly revoked, they can definitely reach out to help@ged.com. And we generally have to wait. We don't get their result immediately. But whenever a test is revoked, the result is put on hold while there's an investigation. So a case is created. Their result is on hold, there's an investigation. And so oftentimes, even before we get involved, the investigation happens. And if it's something where the security team they review the tapes or they look at the situation and they say, okay, clearly that was just the student taking the test, they weren't cheating, then they will release the hold and release the test result. In which case, if the student's test was revoked like halfway through and so they didn't get a chance to finish, then that's when help.ged.com will come in and say, okay, yes, let's make sure that we reschedule your test so that you can keep going. You can finish your test and move on. We can also help reschedule them for a test center if they're just like, you know what, that I don't want to deal with that again. I don't want to take the online proctored test. That's fine too. So there's definitely our teams are available to help the student in those cases. All right. Was that the
I
last
think we should move on with the rest of the slides.
Okay. All right, let's go to check-in and we'll go through these quickly and then we can have more time for questions at the end. So in the student's account on test day, they will see this card, which again encourages them, just like we talked about before, run that system test one more time because it might have been a week ago that you scheduled your test. A reminder to prepare your workspace and what that means. And then they have their launch button here, and this launch button will be there 30 minutes before their test. Once they click the launch button, they get the rules reminder video. It pops up in a smaller window. And that just reminds them about all the things that they need to keep in mind in terms of those rules that we saw on the list before. And then they get to this test page where they get to check in. And again, this is just like what we saw before. So the check-in process is going to be the same as the system test, where they're going to copy the access code. They're going to download the OnView software. They can always change this into a different language if they want to. And then this I opened up here on the side. This is the live chat. So this is where if I'm nervous about going through this process, or maybe something is wrong with the camera on my mobile phone, I can chat a proctor here and get some help. All right, so this is where we copy the access code and we enter our mobile phone number. This is the first page of that check-in process. It's kind of giving you an overview, and this is where the student indicates whether they are 18 years of age or older, or if they are under 18 years of age. So this is where if a student says they are under 18 years of age, they are automatically flagged for a greeter because now they have to go through that unique process where someone needs to give consent for them to be videotaped and test online. All right, first we go through the equipment checks. Again, it's the microphone, speakers, and webcam, just like we went through before. All of them passed. Next, I'm going to get the network check. So this is where I'm going to point out again, this is where I did the network check and my video streaming failed. I'm going to click this rerun button a couple of times. Honestly, even if I click it, like I keep clicking rerun, after a few seconds, I will probably establish that video streaming connection and be good to go. All right, so let's say I did that and now everything has passed. Now I'm going to switch to my mobile phone. So this is going to direct me on exactly what to do. So it's going to say enter that mobile phone number and it's going to pop up on my mobile phone telling me what to do. So this is the part, unless you've taken an online proctor test, you probably haven't experienced this. So first it's gonna, on my phone, it's gonna tell me take a photo of yourself, do a selfie. And it's gonna help kind of guide me on what they're looking for. So I'm not taking my whole outfit, I'm just getting my face. And it's gonna give an example, here's an ideal photo, here's your photo. If I like it, then I can click use photo and continue. Next, it's gonna be my ID. So this is where I'm gonna give ID details, whether I'm using my driver's license, a passport, other government photo ID, the issuing country. Then I'm going to take a picture of the front and the back. Again, it's going to show me kind of ideal, and here's what yours looks like. There's an option to rotate it. If I accidentally took it upside down, I choose, yep, that's good. I'm going to use those photos. And now I click continue. Again, if at any point I'm struggling with these photos, I can chat the proctor and get some feedback and advice on how else can I do this? If maybe my mobile phone is broken and I'm trying to use the video camera on my computer to take these photos, they can help me with that. Finally, I have to do some room photos. So this is where it's going to give you a reminder on what did I do all of these things? Am I in a private distraction-free room? Do I have any notes out that I need to remove? I have my food out. I got to get rid of my food. An extra monitor needs to be unplugged and put aside. Any other devices, headphones, watches, those kind of things need to be set aside. So then I'm going to go through and I'm going to take 4 different pictures of my room. I'm going to take a picture of my workspace from the front, the back, the left, and the right. And it kind of walks me through what that looks like here. And then I go through, take those pictures and then say, yep, those are good. I'm going to use them, continue. At this point on my phone, it's going to tell me, you're good. You submitted all your photos. Go back to your computer now. So now when I'm back at my computer, I'm going to double check that there aren't any applications running in the background. Again, there is that test button here now, so I can test it because before I checked in, I made sure that everything was closed. But I'm going to click that test button to see, okay, is everything really closed? If there is something going on, then it'll tell me, oh, look at that. You've still got Word going. Okay, here's how you go through and quit Word. Got it. Okay, I got everything shut down. Another point here is at this point, I should see my picture in the webcam. If this is black, then my webcam is not actually working. So that's another thing to double check on this screen. All right, after all of that is done, then I have to agree to the rules. You can see that there's actually a checkbox saying that I agree breaking these rules will result in my exam being revoked. And I wrote out those rules on the side here since they're kind of small in that screenshot. So those are all the things. And it is a little bit confusing in that it says place mobile phones out of reach, whereas you were just using your mobile phone. But the idea is that it shouldn't be like right there on your desk. You can put it off to the side. Now I'm waiting for a proctor. The nice thing about this is that I am going to see my queue position. In general, most people don't have to wait for more than 20 minutes max. Most of the time, it's much less than that. In this case, this person is up next. But even if I was like queue position 20, I'd be waiting less than 5 minutes. It goes very quickly. And again, a reminder, if you don't see your face displayed, then the web streaming, either your webcam isn't working or the video streaming isn't working, and you're not going to be able to test. So take a minute to see if you can figure out how to fix that. And then that queue position refreshes every 60 seconds. So if I've been waiting 3 minutes and my queue position hasn't changed, I've probably lost connection and I need to check my internet connection because that should be refreshing every 60 seconds. This is an example real quick of what can happen during the exam. So there are times when I'm taking my exam and for whatever reason, my internet went wonky. If I've lost connection, sometimes the proctor will immediately reach out and say, hey, I can't see you anymore. It looks like we've lost connection. If the proctor can't do that because we've totally dropped, this screen might pop up. It's important here to note that they can click this relaunch button if they think they've solved the problem, or if the proctor tells them to relaunch, they mean relaunch the OnView software, not necessarily completely do a hard reboot of the computer. So the hard reboot of a computer is something that sometimes you do have to do, but it's a last resort. In general, you can probably refresh your modem, reset your modem, kick somebody else off your internet, and then relaunch, and you'll be able to go right back into your test where you left off. We do have the troubleshooting on the student's account as well. So if they, as soon as they launch their test, before we get a result in, we have an activity card that says, if you're here because you had trouble with your test, here's some troubleshooting that you can do, but at a minimum, see if you can reschedule or reach out to us and let us know what happened so we can help you. And then this last one is just the Proctor Communications. I already went through that they're going to give a warning first before they talk to the student. They will use audio to talk to the student if the chat didn't work. And if that fails, they will call the student's mobile phone and see if they can resolve the issue that way. All right, and then just a reminder that the pilot is ending at the end of this month. We're going out of pilot mode. We do have OP test vouchers available on Marketplace and the View Voucher Store now. So if you are getting ready to stock up on vouchers for your programs, actually another announcement, we just went live with bulk tiered pricing on the GED Ready Direct. So if you are purchasing your GED Ready test vouchers through GED Manager, you can now save because we have discounted prices for educators there. And then you can go buy your OP test vouchers on Marketplace. And then this is the screen that we will be updating. I know this is not a very useful website at this point. So this is we're going through the process of revamping the whole online proctored test website for you. And that should be done within the next couple of weeks as well. Okay.
Just as we're wrapping up here, I think we want to let them know that all educators that have signed up for in session will receive the email with the updates to the online proctor test post pilot. There's another email coming out with regards to that, correct?
Yes.
And Alicia asked, what happens if you have a technical issue and can't get it fixed by the time your test is supposed to start? Can you reschedule, and do you have to pay again? I know there's a time frame that they have to reschedule. Can you explain that?
Yes. So if you start that check-in process 30 minutes before your appointment time and you're having technical issues during that 30 minutes while you're trying to check in, we are encouraging students to just reschedule at that point. Like if you're having technical issues at that point, just reschedule your test, even if it's for 2 hours ahead or a week. Give yourself time to troubleshoot those technical issues before you lose that spot, because once your test appointment has started, and this is something that I'm getting clarification on because I think there's maybe a little bit more of a window after your test appointment where you could still reschedule or cancel that test. But just in case, for now, let's just say my test appointment is at 4. If I reschedule at 3:59, I'm fine. If it's 4:05, I may not be able to reschedule or cancel that test, and I may be already going into no-show status. If I do get a no-show, I can still reach out to GED and get help to get that test rescheduled because I had technical issues. But that is generally, if a student just blows off their appointment, then they go into a no-show. And that's when we're saying, hey, you're out that money because you took that time from someone else and then you blew it off. So the technical issues one is where we'll work with the student and say, well, what happened? What issues did you have? And oh, sure. Yeah, we understand. Let's reschedule for you.
Thank you. And as we wrap up here, the email address that Chris pointed out that students should send an email to if they have questions about want an investigation on how their OP test went is help@ged.com. And for all the educators that are on the line that have additional OP questions, send me an email. I cannot type anything here in the chat. I do not know what's going on, but my email address is melissa.hulstrand@ged.com. So just send the questions to me. I will respond to them and give you the answers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. Thank you for leading the session. I really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your summer, guys.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.